Shall we move to rather more serious matters? Let's start with this big story in the Sunday Telegraph this morning. If you are just joining us, the headline is Reeves at war with Labour blockers. Now, it's been a very tricky time for Rachel Reeves, for the government, and of course, I'm amazed that Reeves is still in position, quite frankly, as Chancellor. But Rachel Reeves has said she will not tolerate blockers from within her own party standing in the way of her plans for growth. She says, and this is a warning to the Labour MPs and peers, basically, do not put your own interests above those of the country. So she is saying we need to build the houses, 1.5 million homes in 5 years, which is the same target as the former Conservative government as well. And she basically is now saying, and the speech which she is going to give is on Wednesday, she says essentially the default answer for planning will be yes. She is going to sort of say that environmental groups and all those lobby groups that kick everything into the long grass will be over. Those days are over. There's one other thing that's really important about what she's saying. There will be a sort of planning granted to developments around train stations, and what many people are saying. And whilst I do actually welcome that, what does it mean for those rather smaller villages and towns that are on the train network? But then one might argue that's a brilliant thing to actually kickstart the economy in rural areas.
It's got to be balanced, hasn't it? Because at the moment, and we see this with various governments, they can't do nuance. They run from one side of the ship to the other. And the balance needs to be, look, we need more houses. There are generations who are beneath me and beneath you who can't get on the property ladder in many parts of the United Kingdom, but London and the South East is just a pipe dream for many, right? So we need more properties being built. And the mantra at the moment is let's just ride roughshod over what we would call NIMBYs, not in my backyard, which I don't think is the answer. You need people to buy in locally to what you're trying to do. In my part of the world, and I always talk about it when I'm here on Talk, because I come from West Sussex, it's predominantly rural. I live in a place called Chichester. Outside Chichester, there are a lot of villages, and you used to have the gaps in between villages. I know this sounds quite parochial, but you know, there'd be countryside in between the villages, and increasingly those gaps are disappearing and those villages are losing their identity because they're expanding, because they have housing targets, etc., and those are only going to those targets have increased. We're going to see more house building. My biggest issue regarding this, regardless of where it is in the United Kingdom, is it's all well and good saying, listen, we're going to build loads of houses, vote for us, it's fantastic. You know, the Tories tried it with the last government, Labour are trying it now. What they always forget is the infrastructure that's needed
100%
to support all these houses that are being built. So from a very basic level, GP surgeries, schools, roads. We have a sewage system in the UK that goes back to Victorian times. We already know that the water companies can't keep track of what's happening with sewage. We're not improving those sewage systems at the same time as building these houses. So what's going to happen? There's more pressure on the water system, and I think there's only more problems coming down the pipe.
I've mentioned this before. The way they build in Europe is very different to the way we build here. So they put the infrastructure in first before they build a single house, and that to me seems eminently sensible.
It's common sense.
Well, it is really, and I don't know why we don't do that.
I don't know either, but it seems to me a lot of the objections, understandable objections, are not from so-called NIMBYs going, I don't want houses here. It's, hang on a second, this road is already clogged, right? You build a housing estate with 450 houses on here, the road is going to get worse.
And of course, where I live in Suffolk, they are trying to build on floodplains, for example, and of course the reason the floodplains are there is for a very good reason. There's also, in terms of infrastructure, it's not just doctors and nurses, surgeries and all that kind of stuff. It's supermarkets. Of course it is. And we just don't have the competition in the rural communities that we do in London, for example.
Indeed. So, going back to Chichester in West Sussex, I'm not in payment of the local Tories board, by the way, but there are a lot of houses being built in an area where there's a big old Sainsbury's supermarket, which is fantastic. That supermarket used to have a pharmacy in there. The pharmacy has been closed for a couple of months. So that's just an example that you're building the houses, you need to go and get some pills or whatever. You don't have that facility immediately on the doorstep. But going back to this story about Rachel...
But also it's a monopoly for Sainsbury's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it?
It is. And I'm all for that. If you have retail parks where all of your needs are catered for, that's a good thing.
Yes, but I want to see an Asda next to that Sainsbury's, for example, so that you do have the choice. And what we're seeing, and particularly in my home town or the town near my village, is that we've got one supermarket and the prices are sky high because they know they've got you. And particularly elderly people who cannot drive, then they have you, absolutely have you, and the prices are astronomical.
Choice is always the answer.
Exactly. Now, Rachel Reeves, this is very interesting. So we've got Ed Miliband, and we talked about this yesterday.
Mad Ed
over here saying, oh, look, windmills everywhere, because that's going to be the panacea to everything. 1% last week, 1%.
And he still can't answer the question, if the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, what happens?
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know the answer.
And I was saying this yesterday. He was in East Anglia talking to the local news organisation, saying that this is why we need windmills and we need pylons across amazing farmland, arable farmland. Anyway, that's slightly beside the point. But Ed Miliband over here, Rachel Reeves over here, she's now saying the economy trumps net zero. We were talking about this before we came on air. There is no concerted thought process going on through government.
No, they're lurching from one side to the other because I think the first 6 to 7 months of this government has been so appalling that they're looking for anything to help them. So now it's like anything to do with growth. Let's have a third. Let's get the third runway at Heathrow built. Now, I'm well up for this.
So am I.
I'm well up for this. I mean, I remember, where are we now, 2025, 13 years ago, doing debates on various radio stations about should we have a third runway at Heathrow and all of the arguments for and against. And here we are, 13 years later, and nothing has happened. I'm up for this in a different way because if it means that this government, and I'll be very partial about this, which I think is the worst government I remember, if we start seeing splits in this party, that's a great thing. So Ed Miliband is going to have to, he's either going to have to back the third runway, which makes a mockery of everything else he's saying. Sadiq Khan has already said he might look at a legal challenge. That's the Labour Mayor of London against a third runway. Bring it on.
Well, enter stage left, Sadiq Khan, with his legal response to this. But also, as Mayor of London, really, this is none of your business. I know it's in London, but this should be about national planning infrastructure. And that is where I do agree with the government, that there needs to be some sort of national plan. And if it is of national significance, then I think, you know, there should be a body that oversees that. So that's going to be very interesting. And of course, what we're also going to see is the fracturing of the MPs elected for their local constituents versus the party. Now, of course, they have a huge majority at the moment, but you're already seeing people like Sarah Coombs, the MP for West Bromwich, speaking up against 200 homes being built in her constituency. John Whitby, the MP for Derbyshire Dales, opposing 70 homes on the same day that ministers actually said we're going to increase housing targets. And then Sadiq Khan as well. So I think you're right. You're going to see fracturing of that party. Yeah,
well, this is government, isn't it? This is 14 years in opposition. Now you have to deal with the realities of being in government, and when you're in government, you become more accountable. So if you're an MP and you represent a constituency where you're going to have a load of housing targets forced upon you, and your constituents come to you and say, hang on a second, we don't want this, you're a Labour MP, you're going to have to decide if you're a party person or you're going to represent your people. I mean, it's not just a house building, is it? Because there's some suggestions this morning in some of the Sunday papers that we've got some MPs who want a wealth tax. Well, that will go against Rachel Reeves. There was some stuff in yesterday's newspapers about she's potentially looking at curbing sickness benefits. Well, there'll be a lot of Labour MPs who will be thinking, hang on a second, I didn't stand for election and now I'm elected and I'm going to have to be asked to vote to cut welfare payments. But this is grown-up politics.
It is.
Yeah.
It's about being in power, as opposed to being in the opposition. Let's just talk about this front page of the Mirror. I'll deliver for working people. As many of you know, I absolutely hate this expression, working people. Who isn't a working person? But anyway, Rachel Reeves has vowed ordinary people will be better off on her watch as she sets her sights on smashing obstacles holding the economy back. She says, I'm going to put money in people's pockets faster. We're going to go further. We're going to go faster. There is no return to austerity. Now, this is a complete juxtaposition to what we're being told by everyone else. She also yesterday said there are going to be 6 interest rate cuts. Well, according to whom?
Exactly. What we're seeing here, I think, is a bit of a reset from the Chancellor. She's received a lot of criticism for her budget right across the board, and I'm sure we'll talk about the farmers a little bit later on and various other measures. You've got the business organisations just saying, what are you doing with the increase in employers' NI contributions, whacking up the minimum wage? You don't have to go too far in the papers or in the media to hear business people just going, this is going to kill my company or my organisation. We know it's a disaster for UK business. We also know that the last 6 to 7 months of this government has just not been great. And she started off, I think she made 2 errors, Rachel Reeves. First off, she out of nowhere came this winter fuel payment stuff, which has given her a load of negative headlines. And her first major speech literally talked down this country and this government and the economy, where we then ended up with investors going, I'm not going to invest in Britain while this woman is in charge. She has no faith in her country. And it's all coming back to haunt her. So I think this is a bit of a reset, which is, oh, hang on a second, I need to be maybe learning from people like Donald Trump and taking a leaf out of his book and really talk up Britain.
Well, because she says, I want working people to be better off, we need to go further and faster. Yeah. When you look at the wording of this, and it's really, I think it is quite seismic. I'm going around selling Britain. This is basically, as she returns from Davos, I'm selling Britain and making people know this is a government that is doing things differently. You're not kidding. It's working, the government is working with businesses. No, it isn't. It's not. Working against business.
That's what it seems. And these are great words that she said at Davos and indeed elsewhere. She gave an interview, an exclusive interview to the Times newspaper yesterday, where she talked about boosterism when we refer to this economy and stuff. All words that she's not used before. She talked about the great entrepreneurs we have in this country. This is a bit of a U-turn, because I think she realises that in order to get growth, you need to sell the concept of Britain genuinely as a place to invest and do business to an awful lot of people. She said some nice words. Let's see if there's actually any actions to back it up.
And of course, I think it's worth just reminding ourselves we lost 10,800 millionaires in 2024. That is double the number who left in 2023. They pay about £400,000 in tax. Exactly. And of course, that's losing 500,000 taxpayers.
You've got that going on. You've also got hard and fast evidence out there. I mean, one of the most recent announcements, and we were talking about supermarkets earlier, Sainsbury's saying they're axing 3,000 jobs. Yeah. When that report came out 48 hours ago, you had the management of Sainsbury's directly saying this is because of the measures she implemented or she announced in the budget. All of the signs are there. So again, these words are fantastic, but Rachel, come on, you need some hard and fast actions here.
So there are so many other stories of come on, Rachel. There are so many.
Rachel.
Come on, Rachel. There are so many stories actually that all link into this. But I will just mention the front page of the Observer, which we'll talk about more after the break. But this is the front page of the Observer. It's really fascinating, the pivot here. Move closer to Europe, not Trump, voters tell Starmer. Keir Starmer under growing pressure to forge closer economic links with Europe 5 years on from Brexit. It's worth remembering Brexit was 5 years ago on Friday. Yeah. As I keep saying, we haven't Brexited properly. No. We have put in place the building blocks of this, but we haven't diverged enough. But she is now coming back and saying, this is what Rachel Reeves told the Observer, Brexit has harmed the UK economy. She is determined to claw back some of the lost GDP by reducing trade frictions for UK small businesses. Where do you stand on this?
Well, that's a big question. So I don't think we've had a proper Brexit, and I would say that happened for two reasons. One, the government at the time, in 2016, when Brexit happened, did not even have a plan in place.
And of course, Cameron legged it.
Cameron did a runner. Osborne did a runner. They did not have a plan in place for this country should the majority of people vote leave, which of course they did. For me, that's a dereliction of duty, right? That's the first problem. The second problem is we had a government at the time who were too busy squabbling amongst themselves, you know, in an embarrassing way. And a load of them disappeared off to set up Change UK, some political party and stuff.
Chaka Uma.
You know, so all of that, Chaka Uma, Anna Soubry, all of that leads us to where we are now, which is we've not had a proper Brexit because there was no genuine will from the government at the time, or indeed the civil service. I also think, and I bristle against this idea that as a nation we have to choose between the EU or America.
100%.
I'm going to nick the words of Boris Johnson, and I'm going to probably misquote him ever so slightly. You know, this idea about, you know, you want to have your cake, Britain, and you want to eat it. Well, that's the whole point of having cake, right? So, you know, we came out of the European Union because we wanted more relaxed trade rules so we could trade around the world, including with America, because we couldn't have a UK-US trade deal when we were part of the EU without the EU being an agreement, because it had to be an agreement of one bloc, right? Well, now, less of those restrictions, less of those ties. We should be trading with the US quite happily and with the EU. End of.
Well, it smacks of desperation, actually, if Rachel Reeves has to resort to saying, actually, the problems and the economic woes of this country is because of Brexit. No, it isn't, actually. It's because your budget and because what you did with employers' national insurance, what you're doing with the farmers. We'll also talk about that, front page of the Sunday Express, a national show of unity over a disaster. And that got me thinking, the front page of the Observer, that's why I wanted to do it just before the break, because Rachel Reeves says, in her words, that Brexit has harmed the UK economy. So do you agree with Rachel Reeves that Brexit has damaged the UK? And also, do you agree with Keir Starmer, or the voters that are telling Starmer, we need to move closer to Europe and not Donald Trump? Doesn't that undo the whole basis and ethos of Brexit in the first place?